what's up, guys? Welcome to Diabetes Talk. I'm your host, Charlie O'Connell. We are broadcasting live and direct here in New Haven, Connecticut. I want to thank everybody who just joined us for that awesome lower body level 2 with dumbbells GlucoseZone workout. That felt great. And guys, if you haven't joined us yet, you are missing out on an incredible global experience of people from around the world exercising together, inspiring each other, and basically kicking diabetes butt. So, I want to do a big shout out to Instagram. Nurse Docs, Sue722, I see you. It is great to have you here. Jeanette, it is great to have you here on YouTube. Leslin, it is great to have you here on Facebook. Okay? We've even got Mom Dukes is in the house. It is great to see you there, Mom. Guys, today's topic is, we've actually been on a roll. I do have to say that basically our topics have been dead on point for the last couple weeks. And today's topic is just as important, okay? And I definitely want to do a huge shout out to Veronica in the app. Guys, one of the cool things about the GlucoseZone app, and I want to encourage you if you haven't downloaded it yet, the GlucoseZone app allows you to track and document your GlucoseZone workouts in a very, very sophisticated way. And it also enables us as a team to see and monitor your progress. And Veronica has been kicking diabetes butt in the GlucoseZone app on a continuous basis now for months, okay? And I see you, Veronica, and I'm so impressed with the work you've been putting in. Now, tonight's topic, guys. Tonight's topic is, how does protein affect your glucose levels? And this is such an important topic because there's so much misunderstanding, okay, about what protein is as a macronutrient, what its relationship is to your glucose levels. There's a lot of misinformation in terms of the value of protein in your diet. And our goal tonight is to really, really shed some light on this whole situation, put it in the context of managing type 1 diabetes, managing type 2 diabetes, and then some very, very practical tips and suggestions for you to reach your fitness and weight loss goals, okay? So, the first thing is, let's understand, guys, what a macronutrient is. Okay, so all food sources are classified as either macronutrients or micronutrients. Now, macronutrients are caloric sources of energy. What that means is those nutrients can be used for calorie burning purposes. And I'm sure everyone here has heard the general recommendation that basically all food labeling is based off of an assumption of 2,000 daily calories a day, okay? So, when it comes to macronutrients, there are 4 of them, okay? And the macronutrients are carbs, protein, fat, and water. Now, the reason why they're put together is because you can store all of those nutrients. You can store fat, you can store carbs, you can store protein, you can store water, and you can use them at a later time available as an energy source. Okay? Versus micronutrients. Micronutrients are vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, things like magnesium, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin D, iron, calcium. There's a whole long list of them. And what micronutrients are essential nutrients that your body needs to perform and to be active, but you cannot use them for caloric energy purposes. Okay? And it's very, very important that you understand that distinction. Now, When it comes to the macronutrients, there are two macronutrients that have an impact on your blood sugar. And let's start with the one that most people know about, which are carbohydrates, okay? So carbohydrates raise your blood sugar, and a very processed or simple carb, and by simple carb, what that means is similar in a chemical structure to sugar, to an actual sugar molecule, okay? A simple carb or a processed carb will cause a rise in your blood glucose very quickly, and then will go down very quickly. So that's known as a spike in your glucose levels, all right? So examples of simple carb or highly processed carbs would be actual sugar, right? Table sugar, something like honey, agave, maple syrup, fruit juice, white bread, white rice, okay? Soda, things like that, okay? One thing that's very, very important to understand is that white bread is a highly processed carbohydrate that turns into sugar very quickly, okay? But the amount of carb in white bread is not very different than whole grain bread or whole wheat bread. So let's really distinguish and understand the difference between the glycemic index and the glycemic load. So the glycemic index is referring to time, the amount of time that a food takes to become sugar in your blood, okay? And the higher on the glycemic index, the faster the food will become sugar in your blood. You'll see that spike, okay? That's different than the glycemic load. The glycemic load is the actual total amount of carbohydrate, all right? And you have to understand the difference between the glycemic index and the implications of the difference between the glycemic index and the glycemic load. All right, so simple carbohydrate, highly processed carbohydrates become glucose very quickly and cause a spike, okay? Now, less processed carbohydrate or more complex carbohydrate will cause a more gradual rise in your blood glucose and will actually last longer. So examples of processed carbohydrate, okay, or complex carbohydrates would be things like brown rice, oatmeal, fruit, whole grain bread, starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and squash and things like that, okay? Now, the important thing to understand, guys, is whether a carbohydrate is a simple, fast-acting carb or a complex carbohydrate, they both have a glycemic load that has to be accounted for, right? And I really, really need you to understand that. So I'm going to give you a very, very straightforward example. Let's take carrots and spaghetti, okay? So which food is higher on the glycemic index, carrots or spaghetti? I want you to ask yourself that question, okay? And the answer is carrots. Carrots are higher on the glycemic index. What that means is that the sugar from a carrot will become glucose, will cause a spike in your glucose levels quicker, higher on the glycemic index, okay? Versus spaghetti. Spaghetti will cause a rise in your glucose levels more slowly. But now let me ask you a question. Which food do you think is a healthier option for somebody living with diabetes? Carrots or spaghetti? Right? The obvious answer is carrots. So if you guys are familiar with the parking lot analogy, you can think of carrots like a Mini, okay? It's small, it's fast, it takes up one compact car's parking space in your parking lots for sugar. Versus spaghetti, spaghetti is like a Mack truck. It's slower, it's going to take a longer time to get to the parking lot, but once it gets to the parking lot, it takes up the whole parking lot. All right, so that's an easy kind of funny example to think and understand the difference between simple processed carbs versus complex, okay, carbohydrate and less processed. All right, now, let me just stop right there. We've had a ton of people join us. Donnie Ray, I want to say what's up to you on YouTube, okay? I also want to say what's up to Nora, who's joined us on Facebook, okay? Marisol, who's joined us on Facebook, all right? And on Instagram, we've got Frank has joined us, and Kanan Al-Shamari. Kanan Al-Shamari, it is great to have you here on Instagram, okay? Now, let's get back to understanding this difference between glycemic index and glycemic load. The other thing that's important to understand in terms of the amount of rise and the length of time that a carbohydrate will raise blood sugar, okay, depends on how much fiber and sugar are in them, okay, as well as how much fat and protein are present, right, in the food that you're eating with those carbohydrates. So, fiber, guys, is an important nutrient, okay? Fiber has a dilutive effect when it comes to the glycemic index. What fiber does is actually slow down the absorption of glucose, all right? So if you are having trouble with spikes in your glucose level, adding fiber to your diet can help control the spikes in your glucose. All right? Now, overall, guys, okay, when we're talking about the glycemic index, right, a carbohydrate that has a low glycemic index value, which is 55 or less on the glycemic index, will be more slowly digested, absorbed and metabolized, okay, slower, and cause a lower and slower rise in your glucose levels. It also will therefore have a lower requirement for insulin. But the very, very important thing to understand about that is some foods are low glycemic index that have a high glycemic load. And that's where many people living with diabetes get confused and screwed up. So let's use oatmeal, for example. A bowl of Quaker Oats instant oatmeal only has 3 grams of sugar, but it has over 40 grams of carbohydrate. So what that means is it's a very low glycemic index, meaning that it does not have an immediate spike on your glucose levels, but it actually has a very high amount of carbohydrate. And what happens is people don't really understand that relationship, and 3, 4, 5, 6 hours after they've eaten the bowl of oatmeal, all of a sudden they see a huge spike in their glucose levels, and they say, why did that happen? Okay? And they've mismanaged the presence of insulin, whether it's injected and or naturally secreted. All right? So guys, understand the impact of the glycemic index versus the glycemic load. Now, let's get to protein, because that's what this talk is about. So, the first thing, guys, that's very, very important to understand about protein is that protein converts into blood sugar. And protein alone will cause a rise in your blood sugar levels, even if there is no carbohydrate present. Now, there is an excellent, excellent article that is on GlucoseZone.com, which is called How Protein Impacts Glucose Levels. And it's written by one of our favorite trainers, a guy named Robbie Stevenson. The important thing to understand, first off, is that protein impacts glucose levels. All right? Now, there was a study that was published in 2016 that showed that the consumption of 75 to 100 grams of protein, which is about 9 to 13 ounces of meat, will cause a rise in blood sugar levels similar to 20 grams of carbohydrate. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Generally speaking, so I'm going to dispel a couple myths. The first thing is the myth that you need more protein in your diet. That is basically not true for 95% of America for sure. Okay? In fact, it's actually the exact opposite. Most Americans are consuming too much protein. Okay? And they're consuming too much protein that's unhealthy for them in the form of red meat or processed meat. Okay? So that's myth number one, that you should be consuming more protein. That is not true. The second thing that's very important to understand, especially when it comes to type 1 diabetes, is that protein is a free snack. All right, so what does a free snack mean? Okay. When a kid has type 1 diabetes, it can be very, very challenging to find foods to support an active childhood. And protein has been identified as something that a kid can eat that will basically is considered a free snack. So what that means is you don't have to bolus for the snack. And what bolusing means is give yourself some insulin. Okay? The problem with that is that it leads to misunderstanding about what the relationship between protein and insulin is. And what ends up happening is people hear the term free snack associated with protein, and so they make the incorrect assumption that, well, I don't need insulin when I consume protein. And that is not the case, okay? Protein converts into glucose. It converts into glucose much slower than carbohydrate, but it converts into glucose nonetheless. And you may intuitively already know that, or you may be experiencing some really frustrating things. Here's a very, very common experience. People will go out, actually I'll give you a perfect example for me, okay? Because I remember this one very specifically. Last year, right around this time last year, I went out for dinner at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, okay? And I had a filet mignon. Now, that was a high protein, low carbohydrate meal. I literally had a steak with asparagus, okay? And I had some of the other sides, but it wasn't like I had a crazy stuffed baked potato or anything like that. Now, I gave myself insulin for that meal. 2.5 hours later, I actually had a low blood sugar episode. Okay, so my blood sugar was in the 60s 2.5 hours after eating. When I woke up the next morning, my blood sugar was 380. Now, why did that happen? What caused that? What caused that was the combination of the fact that protein becomes glucose, okay, and that fat impacts the digestion, release of protein and carbohydrate, and impacts your sensitivity to insulin. So, let's talk about fat. Fat causes your cells to be less responsive to insulin, okay, which means that your body needs to produce more insulin. You need to adjust your insulin dose with an increased or delayed bolus, okay? Because literally what fat does is it delays the gastric emptying process, all right? And this is a very, very important thing to understand that can be used either to your advantage or can be really, really problematic, all right? So many people basically make the mistake of thinking that one, they need to eat more protein, two, protein is a free food that doesn't require any type of insulin coverage. And then 3, they don't realize how much fat they're consuming when they eat protein, and that the effect that fat has on their actual digestion of digestion of macronutrients, and the ultimate impact on their diabetes and their blood sugar levels. Okay? So, let me stop right there. Let's acknowledge, guys, that this is a complicated and sometimes confusing subject. All right? Because I'm sure you've heard a lot of different conflicting advice. But what I want to communicate to you is just to kind of recap and understand these kind of truths that you should be aware of, right? The first truth is that protein causes an impact on your glucose levels. Protein converts into glucose, and protein causes your blood sugar levels to go up. The second thing is, for the most part, you do not need to consume more protein. The reality is, vast majority of Americans are actually consuming too much protein, and would recommend consuming less protein. The third thing is, the quality of the protein that you do consume is very, very important, and the impact that fat has on your body's ability to metabolize and digest protein and carbohydrate, okay, has to be understood. All right, let me stop right there. We've been joined by one of my favorite family members in California. I see you guys over there at Southwest Industrial Electric. It is great to have you here, okay? Maria has joined us. Carmela has joined us. Rap Cap has joined us here on Facebook. And Nora, okay? Nora Buenaventura. I love that name, Nora. It is great to have you here on Facebook. So, we've got a great question coming from my man Brunda on Facebook, okay? Brunda, it's great to have you here on Facebook and joining our diabetes talk. Guys, Brunda is another person who has been kicking diabetes butt in the GlucoseZone app, okay? And Brunda asks, will coconut oil help diabetes? All right? So, that's a really, really good question. I'm assuming that basically you're talking about cooking with coconut oil, okay? Coconut oil is a healthy source of cooking oil and of fats, all right? What you want to avoid are things like palm oil. And this is one of the things, and I have to give credit actually to my mom, because my mother, who is an expert in nutrition, guys, has really opened my eyes to the totally screwed up replacement of cooking oils with things like palm oil, okay, and other oils that are not consumable by humans, okay, and can really, really wreak havoc on your digestion system and basically your body's hormonal response to oils, all right? So it's a great question, Brunda. Will coconut oil help your diabetes? I wouldn't say that there's a direct connection between helping your diabetes. I would more say that it is a safe, okay, and healthy option in terms of using oils. Now, I prefer olive oil, okay, for my cooking and salad dressings and things like that, but coconut oil is okay. All right, now, Emily Ann has joined us on Instagram. And Lulu is here with us, okay? Guys, Lulu is another person who's absolutely been kicking diabetes butt lately. All right, now, that was a great, great question from Brunda, okay? One of the interesting things, guys, okay? One of the really, really interesting thing is understanding and identifying the proteins that work for you. So what I would recommend is lean, either fish-based protein or poultry. Okay, those are really the forms of protein that our bodies, they're very, very low in fat. Okay, and so talking about chicken, we're talking about turkey primarily here in the States, okay? But there are other forms of poultry that can be consumed. Duck is a popular form of poultry, okay, in other countries. And then fish. So the most common ones here in the United States are salmon and tuna, which those are fine. But really, guys, any type of fish, okay, is going to be an excellent source of protein for you. And you will totally notice the impact that it has on your diabetes. Now, what you want to be careful of, what you want to be really, really conscious of is how much red meat you're consuming and the quality of that red meat. So, I brought up Ruth Chris Steakhouse. Guys, if you are having a steak, for example, once a month, okay, and it's of a high quality steak, right, and basically you know what the source of that steak is, then I would say, you know what, that's okay. But I really, really want to encourage you to take a step back from the daily consumption of red meat. And if you're having a hamburger every day, if you're having steak once or twice a week, if you are consuming pork once or twice a week, I want you to just step back from that for a second, because those proteins are incredibly caloric. They have high ratios of fat. And ultimately, the bottom line is, guys, with diabetes, less macronutrients, generally speaking, put our body in a healthier place to do two things. First thing, actually utilize the stored sources of energy that we already have in our body to start to be used. Okay? And that is such an important, incredible concept that you have to understand, is that your body is designed to provide you with all the energy that it needs, okay, and stored energy. And if you have 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds to lose, you need to change your thinking in terms of that is hundreds of thousands of calories worth of energy that your body is literally waiting to start using. And the continuous consumption of protein and fat, which causes elevation in glucose levels, makes that almost impossible. All right, so got a couple really, really good questions on Facebook. And Facebook has been popping tonight. It's good to have you guys here on Facebook. So, first question, how much protein should we take for a day? All right, here is the reality, guys. Okay, I'm going to give you the extreme version that everybody thinks they need, but is not really the reality. So, one of our favorite inspiring, aspiring people, one of my heroes, guys, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had a rule of consuming as much protein, okay, as in terms of grams as your desired body weight. So for example, if your desired body weight is 200 pounds, his recommendation would be consume 200 grams of protein. Now here's the thing. If you are 29 years old, you're a professional bodybuilder or an aspiring professional bodybuilder, and you lift weights for 5 hours a day, and you do not eat any carbohydrate, then okay, yes, that may be something to follow. But the reality is there are very, very few people who are willing and able to put the workout in the gym and to be very, very strict with their consumption of other foods to justify that much protein. Okay? So I would immediately, just off the bat, without knowing anything else about Brunda, I would cut that number in half immediately, right? So basically, if your goal weight is 200 pounds, then 100 grams consumption of protein would be a maximum amount of protein that you would want to eat. That may even be higher than what I would recommend. Okay? Now, the next question came from Carmela, right? Carmela has a great question. What about lamb? I heard that lamb is better. So lamb, very, very popular food in other countries. You know, it's interesting. We don't eat as much lamb here in the United States as in other places. Lamb is somewhere in between red meat and poultry. All right? So lamb, I would say, is better than red meat, but it's definitely not as good or not as healthy a source as poultry or fish. All right? Now, the next interesting comment that we've got, okay, is how can I get rid of protein in the urine? Okay? Which is a really, really important question. And here's the thing. If you are spilling protein in your urine, that is something you need to talk with your doctor about. Okay? Because not all things, guys, are fixed through diet. Not all things are fixed through exercise. Okay? Now, your doctor may identify something in your diet that's causing that to happen, but that's the type of condition where it's like, you know what? You really, really need to talk to your doctor about healthy, safe ways to address that issue. All right, now, the last thing we're going to leave you guys with, a general recommendation. This is going to require some math, though, okay? Is the general recommendation for protein consumption is 0.8 grams of protein, okay, times your body weight in kilograms. So for example, if your body weight is 100 kilograms, okay, you should be consuming approximately 80 grams of carbohydrate a day. All right? All right. Now, we're going to, you know what, guys? That was a really, really quick 33 minutes. We've gone a couple minutes overboard. We're going to stop right there. These are great questions in the comments that are coming through. I want to encourage you guys, keep the comments and questions coming in. It helps us develop this programming. We want to be responsive to what you guys are interested in. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on Diabetes Talk. I want to thank you guys on Instagram. Thank everybody who joined us on Facebook. And of course, guys, everyone who joined us on YouTube around the world. We love getting the GlucoseZone with you, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't downloaded the GlucoseZone app, guys, don't wait. Download GlucoseZone. I will see you tomorrow in the GlucoseZone. Great job.